If you look at ILO standards, we will find a definition of collective bargaining that defines collective bargaining as any negotiations taking place from one end between an employer's organization, an employer or a group of employers, and on the other end between a workers' organization or a number of workers' organizations. So this is an issue related to terms and conditions of employment, on relations between employers and workers, or the relation between employers' organization and workers' organization. So maybe to describe it a bit better, any negotiation which is taking place between employers and workers' representatives, usually that we call unions, to determine and to negotiate jointly what's going to be the terms and conditions of employment. For example, what's going to be the wages that will be applied in a particular sector or in a particular enterprise, or working hours, for example, or benefits or training. So through collective bargaining, employers and unions will have a chance to discuss and to commonly agree on what's going to be the standards that will be applied in a particular industry, sector, enterprise, plant, for example.
Actually, we have the law that stated these terms and conditions, and the law protects the rights of the workers. Do we still need the collective bargaining, even we have the law?
I think we need collective bargaining. Take the example of wages. The states in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the United States are usually setting minimum wages, which is a basic minimum standard. It cannot be so high because you have weak companies who cannot afford to pay more. You have badly skilled workers who cannot earn more. But at the industry level, you can negotiate between social partners higher wages, especially in companies where people take responsibility, working hard. There you develop different pay scales, and this helps people to get better pay conditions industry by industry.
Mm-hmm. So in the collective bargaining, who can do the negotiation?
So, still looking at ILO standards tells us that collective bargaining so from one belongs to what we call workers' organization. So, from one side we say we've got the employers, which is usually easy to identify. It's either the employer or a group of employers through an employers' organization usually that will make a coalition, a group together, and on the other side it belongs to workers' organization that very often we call the trade unions. A very important ILO convention, which is Convention 135, stipulates that collective bargaining could take place between employers and workers' representatives only in the absence of workers' organization at the respective level. So we see, if we look at these standards, that the right to collectively bargain belongs to trade unions, to workers' organizations. So that's very important because workers' organizations, they've got, for example, the legal capacity to conclude agreement. And they will stay in the enterprise, in the sectors for many years. They will be also accountable for the success and the implementation of the collective bargaining agreement. For example, if they sign a collective bargaining agreement and that the workforce is not happy with this collective bargaining agreement, in some ways they will be accountable by the membership of the organization of the success or not of the collective bargaining agreement. So it belongs to employers and workers' representatives, usually represented by workers' organizations.
What are the levels of the collective bargaining? What kind of levels that collective bargaining should take place?
I think the collective bargaining takes place at all levels, at enterprise level, at sectoral level, and even at national level in different countries. And if you only have negotiations at enterprise level, the scope of collective bargaining is very limited, and you cannot guarantee good pay, decent pay for everybody in one sector, and also there will be black sheeps in the industry. This means employers which are not covered and they are paying lower wages and underbidding other employers. Therefore, the sectoral negotiations has some advantages. You create similar working conditions for everybody in one industry, so a worker gets the same salary for the same type of work in the whole industry. And this is an advantage for workers because they get better wages. And it's also an advantage for employers because they do not have to negotiate, they have industrial peace. And finally, they have a level playing field for their competition. They know, oh, my competitor on the other side of the street has to pay the same wage, so I can pay this wage as well, and it is good for all of us. And finally, the partners can develop joint initiatives to increase productivity, to train workers. For example, set up a training center, which you cannot do at an enterprise level alone. It would be too costly.
For the ILO, it's very important that employees and unions have the capacity to decide at which level they will bargain. And Gerard has mentioned different levels: national level, sectoral level, enterprise level. We also have in some countries collective bargaining at occupational level, at regional level, at municipal level. And there's a relationship. So the fact that you've got collective bargaining at one level does not mean that you should not have collective bargaining at a different level. In many countries, you will find collective bargaining agreement at national level, at sectoral level, at enterprise level, and there will be a coordination between these different mechanisms. So different level, different possible level of collective bargaining. And it's very important that employers and unions have the capacity and, for example, a legislative framework in which they can establish collective bargaining at the levels that they wish.
Can you explain me a little bit about the process and what is the main importance in the collective bargaining?
I mean, the most important is that both partners are ready to negotiate in good faith and that they do not intend to develop hostile relationships and negotiations without coming at the end to terms. This means there have to be a trust between social partners, which is difficult to build up, and it's a learning process. As soon as you started having some experience and you have good experience, you can see that the other side is not asking for too high wages, but for wages in line with your productivity increases. Then over time you can develop trust, and I would say this is a learning process which might last some years. And in countries, the European countries, my country, where you have very developed industrial relations and collective bargaining, it was a learning process over 100 years.
This is very interesting. Can you give me a little bit of a taste, a good practice of the collective bargaining?
Just maybe very practically, typically collective bargaining will start with a list of demands from the unions that will sometimes, very often, first in writing, we send to the employer a request to collectively bargain with a list of the things that they'd like and what they're asking the employers. So maybe they wish to discuss working time, maybe they want to discuss training, maybe they will be wishing to discuss wages or benefits, and then a discussion face-to-face will take place, and it's called the collective bargaining agreement. This is a contract. It's a document signed by the two parties, the employers and the workers' side.
So can I know more? What is the outcome of the collective bargaining?
Yeah, there is a lot of international research on the outcome, and researchers like me and others were comparing the results of collective bargaining. And we can say in countries where we have strong collective bargaining and many employees, high shares of employees are covered by a collective agreement, the income distribution is less unequal. You have less poor people because the wages are better. Those who are skilled, those who are foremen, those who take responsibility are getting much more than the minimum wage. They are doing a more responsible wage. And in the end, the result is that incomes are less unequally distributed. And a second result is that the employment and also is higher in countries where you have a high coverage by collective agreements, and unemployment is lower. And the good question is, why is this the case? The first reason is that with better incomes, people can buy more. So you create through collective bargaining a middle class who can afford goods which are hopefully domestically produced and a country can develop. And without a middle class, a country cannot develop. And the second point is, if social partners cooperate in trust and you have industrial peace and you agree on issues like improving productivity, on training people, the productivity is increasing, so which makes companies also more productive. In general, I would say if actors are doing collective bargaining well, I mean they have to cooperate in good faith and not be hostile to each other, the results are really very positive.
I would add maybe something Gerard mentioned, social peace. And through collective bargaining, unions and employers have a chance to sit together and try to find solutions to their joint problems. So, and a collective bargaining agreement will be signed by a workers' organization, an employers' organization, and an employer will stipulate and will determine what's going to be the relationship between the unions and the employer for a couple of years. So it's very important, especially when you know in some industry which are under pressure, to have a stability in terms of production, in terms of predictability of what's going to be the employment, the relationship between the unions and the employers.
Is there any country that can have a good country development where the collective bargaining is not a culture, to your experience?
I know countries which are economically successful, where the collective bargaining is not much developed. I mean, some East Asian countries are a good example, but the problem is these countries are very unequal. And people, let's say skilled people who just get the minimum wage will always feel unhappy. So for the happiness of the population, for the motivation of the population, I think it would be much better to have collective bargaining.